Welcome everyone that is here viewing, and welcome to our panelists. This is a session on student experiences with campus anti-Semitism. So we have four wonderful student advocates here that are going to share some of their stories and experiences. I'm Allie Levine. I'm the New England Regional Assistant Director for Alums for Campus Fairness, and I will be helping to moderate by asking the questions. So to get started, I'm going to have each of our students introduce themselves and share the roles that they have on campus.
Hi, I'm Inbal Turjaman. I'm the ICC Fellow at UT Austin. I'm a junior here studying economics and sociology.
Hi, I'm Lila. I am a sophomore at Indiana University, and I am the Stand With Us Emerson Fellow studying International Studies and French.
Hi, my name is Chloe Levion. I'm a fourth year at UCLA studying sociology and Israel studies. I'm the president of Bruins for Israel and senior chair of BIPAC, and I'm the alumni network liaison at Stand With Us.
All right, we're going to go ahead and start with the first question. I think it looks like Nicole is having some technical difficulties with her mic. Keep working on that, and when you get it working, I'll give you the chance to introduce yourself and jump in. But we'll start with our first question, which is to please describe the campus climate for Jewish students on your college campus. Do you think that most Jewish students feel safe expressing their Judaism and support of Israel on campus, including in the classroom?
Sorry, are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I was having trouble with my microphone. Hi, I'm Nicole Rosenzweig. I'm a sophomore at Duke University studying public policy and political science, and I'm Duke's Israel on Campus Coalition Fellow and a Duke Student Government Senator of Academic Affairs.
Okay, so I guess answering the question, I go to the University of Texas, so we don't have a very big Jewish population, but it's a decent size. We have a very involved Chabad and Hillel here, so I feel like students are very comfortable expressing their Judaism and be part of the Jewish community. However, I don't think that a lot of people are comfortable with their Zionistic views. We've had a couple of anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist incidents this past semester, so a lot of students are kind of afraid to speak out and maybe say that they support Israel and so forth.
UCLA is often in the news for the anti-Semitic incident of the week, and it has a thriving pro-Israel and Jewish community. I think most Jewish students feel comfortable sharing their Jewish identity in the classroom, but not their Zionist identity. An example of this is I'm the president of Bruins for Israel, and at our board meeting when we were planning our Shine a Light on Anti-Semitism tabling, we had a conversation on whether or not we feel comfortable having an Israel flag on Bruin Walk, the area with the most foot traffic on campus. At first, I was shocked by this, and I didn't understand why a group of proud Zionists would not want to have their Israel flag with them on campus. But then I realized that they genuinely feared for their safety on campus, and they were afraid of being attacked. UCLA has an Israel Studies and a Jewish Studies department, two separate departments, a Hillel, a Chabad, an Olami, and countless Jewish clubs on campus. It's a great time to be a Jew at UCLA, and it is also a challenging time to be a Jew at UCLA.
For IU, you can pretty much pick out the Jewish East Coast kids. They're a dime a dozen here at IU. Despite being, in the middle of cornfields, soy fields in Bloomington, Indiana, it is a safe haven for a lot of Jewish students looking to go to college. I know that was one of the main reasons I picked IU, was that it was a safe space. That's not to say that we don't have our incidences. I mean, I wish it was perfect. It's not. We see anti-Semitism on campus, but administration, Hillel, Chabad, the Jewish Greek houses, different affinity groups, non-Jewish affinity groups always react very positively in supporting Jewish students and helping ensure that everyone is safe and happy and that the place we call home is safe for everybody. So I'm very thankful for that. I don't know why IU is like that because, again, it's kind of very randomly in the middle of the US, but I know that Jewish students are very thankful to have this place.
I think at Duke University, there have been recent instances of anti-Semitism and hostility towards students who are pro-Israel or who identify as Zionists, who support Israel. But at the same time, there are a lot of instances of solidarity and support for Jewish students. So the Freeman Center for Jewish Life is really where we have a lot of our Hillel events. Our Hillel is part of Jewish Life at Duke, which is a student affairs department and has been super supportive, has an amazing rabbi and staff who interact with so many Jewish and non-Jewish students to share about our culture and religion and to welcome students in for Shabbat and the other Jewish holidays. But at the same time, there have been instances of hostility towards students who show any support for Israel, or even those who don't directly express their views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for any perceived connection to Israel or Jewish Zionist identity. It has been very difficult for many students, including myself, but at the same time, there are numerous student organizations. We have now finally Duke Student Supporting Israel has been recognized by the student government after this past fall, when the recognition was vetoed on the basis of social media conduct. And it was a very baseless decision that was finally reversed, and that we've adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, the IRA definition. And I do feel very supported in my efforts as a Jewish student, and feel as though most of my peers are very curious and willing to learn about my Jewish identity and my experiences growing up from a Jewish family and a predominantly Jewish town. But at the same time, there have been instances of hatred and bigotry directed towards Jewish students, but we do have a lot of support from our campus staff as well as from alumni who have our backs.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. It is nice to hear that you all feel like you do have support while anti-Semitism is rising. It also kind of seems like maybe anti-Zionism is an easier target and is a bigger target on campus. So I'm curious a bit about the anti-Zionist groups on your campus and what some of the recent campaigns they've launched, and if those are creating a hostile learning environment for Jewish students.
A few months ago, I would say that the anti-Zionist groups weren't as active as the Zionist groups on campus, but now I don't know if that's true. Bruins for Israel and the Zionist groups on campus have definitely had more events this year, but they are also very active behind the scenes. Tomorrow is the first day of Palestine Liberation Week at UCLA, which is SJP at UCLA's version of Israel Apartheid Week, which includes a wall on campus by the Bruin Bear, a Zionism teach-in, an anti-colonial art night, and a Divest from War letter writing campaign. Concurrently, Bruins for Israel is hosting Choose Love Week, where we'll be selling shirts with love written in English, Hebrew, and Arabic for a donation to Save a Child's Heart. We'll have the Stand With Us, Our Voices for Peace tabling, which highlights different Israeli and Arab peace initiatives. And we'll also be having a vigil for the 11 innocent lives that were taken in Israel in the name of terror last week. BDS also passed last year in student government, and there were multiple anti-Semitic statements adopted from different departments at UCLA and within the student government.
So much like Chloe said, at UT, we are also on the verge of starting Israel Apartheid Week next week. It's also Israel Block Party for Hillel. So there are going to be a lot of protests. They put up an apartheid wall as well, stating facts against Israel. Recently, there's also been a legislation introduced in student government. Also in student government, introduced that called for revoking the IRA definition of anti-Semitism on campus, which was adopted this past year. So there was a lot of turmoil, but with a lot of mobilization, we were able to stop it. Yeah.
Thankfully, anti-Zionism isn't huge on campus. I believe at this point, maybe 10 or so years ago, maybe not that long, student government tried to pass a BDS movement to the point where administration stepped in and was like, what are you doing? We don't do that. Like, not your best idea. Very thankful that that's how administration looks at it here. So ever since then, nothing has been able to pass in student government. If anything, there now, the newly elected student government is very pro-Israel, pro-Jewish student. Both the president, vice president, not Jewish, and they frequent Hillel, I think mainly because it's a free dinner on Friday nights. But whatever gets them there, and I'm very thankful for it. And so we're hoping that with this new student government that we can pass IRA on campus. It's kind of one of those things that everyone knows about, we all talk about, yet we realized this year it was actually never passed. I think it was kind of just already assumed and adopted, but never put into actual paperwork. So we're working to get the real signatures on that. But with that, again, anti-Zionism and anti-Israel rhetoric isn't really found on campus because it's not tolerated on campus, which again, I'm just very lucky to, and I guess that's my message all day, is that I'm very lucky as to where I go and that I don't have to deal with that. The worst we've had is the student-led newspaper recently posted what about Palestine, in talking about what's happening in Ukraine. It's a random Tuesday afternoon. We don't really know what prompted it. And so Hoosiers for Israel, which is our pro-Israel group, and I'm on the board for it, we very quickly sent out an email being like, what about Palestine? Why are we bringing it up on a Tuesday afternoon when we're talking about Ukraine? Two very different problems in the world. And kind of pretty much questioned and asked for definitions on everything that they wrote about, because they like to create their own definition of what apartheid is and their own definition of where borders are. And so we kind of just pushed back to start an open conversation to try and, educate more people about what's happening.
At Duke, especially recently, and speaking to my experiences post-pandemic, since I'm a sophomore, a lot was virtual and a lot of organizing happened virtually last year, but especially this year with events coming back in person, I've noticed a lot of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic instances on campus as well. And just recently, this past week, Duke's chapter of SJP had Israeli Apartheid Week, and they hosted a series of events, including a speaker panel for which the student government authorized over $16,800, including a $5,000 direct payment to Mohammed Al-Kurd, who is an outspoken anti-Semite and blood libelist. He's compared Jewish people to Nazis and claimed that Israelis are harvesting the organs of Palestinians and drinking their blood, in various Twitter statements within the past year, as well as in his book that he spoke about. And I opposed the use of student tuition money through the student activity fee to fund this anti-Semitic speaker and provide him with a platform on Duke's campus. But unfortunately, in a 17-8 vote, the funding was still approved for SJP's events, which took place this past week. And they were very hostile towards Jewish and pro-Israel students. And these events really, I do think, created a hostile environment and were not conducive to learning or fostering the open dialogue that they claimed that this would promote in the name of free speech and open dialogue, not asking any questions that challenged their narrative about this supposed apartheid. And about the actions of the Israeli government and their stances on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as targeting especially Jewish students and calling people sex enthusiasts and apartheid lovers. And this was very difficult and challenging this past week. We had a petition which got over 2,300 signatures opposing Mohammed Al-Kurd coming to Duke, but it was still very difficult that the funding was approved and ultimately that the Duke student government voted to authorize this funding through the Duke student activity fee for a speaker with such hateful views towards my community. So it was a very challenging situation, but we also have a lot of support and solidarity behind us with the organizing that we did in response to this event and to peacefully protest and display that this isn't just a one-sided issue and to display our stances on what's going on.
Great. So a couple things that have come up more than once from a couple of you are the IRA definition and Apartheid Week. So if one of you could explain a bit about what the IRA definition is, and if somebody else could explain maybe what Apartheid Week looks like on campus. I know a lot of our alumni have not experienced an Apartheid Week on campus. So maybe sharing some of what the events look like, what's the purpose of the wall, and that type of information.
The IRA definition is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. It's a definition of anti-Semitism with 11 bullet points that show how modern manifestations of anti-Semitism take place. It's a guide to show the nuances of anti-Semitism, and it also states that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic.
And to your second question about Israeli Apartheid Week, I think it looks a bit different on each campus, but it's often organized by Students for Justice in Palestine or other similar student groups and has been accompanied by an apartheid wall. I believe there was one at Duke a few years ago, but not this year. And at Duke, there was the speaker panel that I discussed and various hostile sentiments that are expressed towards Israel in what is usually a very one-sided conversation unless these pro-Israel groups speak out and debunk a lot of the false narratives surrounding Israeli Apartheid Week.
Thank you so much for elaborating on some of these definitions that we don't hear every day. It's very helpful. And so now I'm curious if you have ever been attacked, not necessarily physically, but online or verbally, or if you know somebody who has on your campus for being Jewish or Zionist on campus, and how did you respond? And if you reported it, how did the administration respond?
So that hadn't really happened on campus at IU until there was like a month where everyone that decided they wanted to do something anti-Semitic must have communicated together and decided that that month was going to be when something happened. So we had on a floor of dorms, people ripping down mezuzahs and like throwing them in the trash, putting them like down the toilets. Like it was a whole chaos of a thing. They were throwing pennies at Jewish students that lived on these floors. And then more personally for me, I'm in a Jewish Greek house. I'm in Segment Alta Tau, and there we have 6 or 5 other Jewish Greek houses on campus. And someone anonymously posted on Greek Rank calling out all of the houses, specifically API and ZBT, using names of the boys in these chapters, using the addresses of their house, like just saying horrific things, making Holocaust comparisons, and just very, very scary stuff. And so with what happened with the freshmen and having the mezuzahs ripped down to then having the Greek Rank thing posted, Hillel and Chabad worked together to create the Mezuzah Project, which is pretty much slapping a mezuzah on every doorpost possible on campus. And they're these red or crimson colors because our colors are cream and crimson. And they say, "I stand with my Jewish friends." And so now every Jewish Greek house has one on their doorpost. I think a few non-Jewish Greek houses also have them. They're on almost every main building in our school, like across our campus, and then on almost every single doorpost in our student union, which is this huge castle of a building that pretty much every student passes through at least 5 times a week. And so while those instances were terrifying and the Jewish Greek houses had to be put on a watch list for with the police, which wasn't a great phone call to tell my parents that I'm now on a police watch list to make sure I'm safe. I was very thankful that, again, in the middle of corn and soy fields, these police officers who probably have not really met very many to any Jewish students were so willing to protect everyone and make sure we were all safe, even more so than they already always do. And that Hillel and Chabad were working together, and that our campus now has 1,000,004 crimson mezuzahs that say I stand with my Jewish students, and it makes me feel safe and really happy every time I walk through a door and I see that it's on the doorpost.
While I have not directly been the target of an anti-Semitic attack, I think a lot of the incidents on our campus are shown through microaggressions and affiliations. So, for example, this past year I advocated for the IRA definition and against divestment in government, and so now I have been affiliated with Zionism, and every whenever I want to collaborate with other representatives in government and stuff, they think twice before doing it with me, or they hold it against me for being Zionist. So I wanted to work on legislation regarding food, not even anything Jewish is in government. And immediately a few people were like, "Oh, you voted against this legislation. We do not want to work with you." Other incidents, again, microaggressions. One of my friends had a swastika drawn on her car the other day. Another friend had pennies thrown at him and asked to pick them up because he was Jewish and he liked money. And so while it's not very out there, like ripping mezuzahs off dormitory doors, it's still sometimes a hostile environment, and students do not like it.
I also haven't been personally attacked, but similarly, there have been certain anti-Semitic stereotypes or rhetoric that has been directed toward myself and other Jewish students, especially the same Jewish students who are always advocating in the Duke student government to try to convey our frustration with certain decisions and to convey our perspectives on especially the recent decisions regarding students supporting Israel, and to come together to pass the IRA definition and to oppose funding for SJP's event with an anti-Semitic speaker. And I think I have been very involved in a lot of that and similarly labeled as such. I've also experienced certain instances of people applying anti-Semitic stereotypes, especially as my fellow panelists were saying about the Jewish lobby or Jewish money and other harmful stereotypes that people might not know about or understand why they're so hurtful to the Jewish community and how they've been perpetuated across centuries against Jewish people. And I also know other Jewish students who have also have had similar experiences and have had to deal with this anti-Semitic rhetoric. And a lot of times this anti-Semitic rhetoric, especially at Duke, comes with people using the excuse of just being against Israel or being critical of Israel. But I have no problem with people being critical of Israel, and neither does the IRA definition. A lot of times, then, though, for people to call out Jewish students and say that because you're Jewish, now you're a settler enthusiast and you are an apartheid lover, and that you are supporting all of these horrible and derogatory statements that people are making, is very harmful and can create these overgeneralizations, stereotypes, and false narratives about the Jewish community and about students who support Israel. So it has been very unfortunate to see at Duke And a lot of times those statements are directed and sort of disguised as not being against Jewish students, but against Jewish students who may support Israel, or if that is part of their identity.
Thankfully, I have not been physically attacked, but I have been harassed on social media and my events have been counter-protested. I'm a transfer student, and at my former campus, Santa Monica College, I was singled out on social media for being Euro trash, for being a Zio colonizer, and much worse terms. Our events were counter-protested, and at UCLA, I've witnessed multiple anti-Semitic classroom graffitis from saying "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" to an alleged, we couldn't find it, but we heard the reports of a swastika replacing the Magen David and the Israel flag, saying "Stop this radical Zionist agenda." There are also multiple anti-Semitic posts by the student government president and other students with high roles on campus. And in the beginning of UCLA moving back to in-person in February, there was a mass shooting manifesto by a former UCLA professor. And in that manifesto and on his YouTube channel, he said that Hitler should have completed his job, and he said a lot of different anti-Semitic dangerous things. On my social media activist account, I get anti-Semitic comments and messages on a daily basis. When hate comes from peers, I report it to the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Office, to the Vice Chancellors, to Hillel, to administration. And with social media, I report it to the platform itself and to the ADL and Stand With Us.
Thank you all so much for sharing. Before we move into our final question, I just want to remind everybody who is watching to put your questions in the Q&A tab. We will have a few minutes at the end for our panelists to answer any of your questions. And we would love to hear from you. So our final question for our panelists right now is, how has Alums for Campus Fairness been valuable in combating anti-Semitism on your campus? And how can alumni continue to support students?
Personally, I came from a really, really small hometown of about 2.5 square miles. I went to a private school that I graduated with 24 girls, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, I found myself on a campus of 40,000 people. So I went from being a really, really big fish in a really small pond to a goldfish in the Atlantic Ocean. And I didn't really know what to do. So I found my community within the Jewish community at IU. And then once that happened and things, started to happen, or I had questions or incidences started to arise, or really anything, because I was kind of swimming in the dark, knowing that there's alumni there to help, and I have reached out to alumni to help, really helped me solidly put my feet on the ground and feel, okay, I can do this. I can, navigate the scary Atlantic Ocean by myself, because at the end of the day, I'm not by myself. I have a bunch of people behind me that have been through it before, have, bumbled through it and kind of figured out what works and what doesn't. So hopefully it means I don't have to figure out what works and what doesn't. I can just listen to their sage and wonderly advice and kind of just go with it. And it's just been really helpful knowing that there are people to help me that I don't have to, swim to find within the 40,000 people here. I kind of have, one path to know where people are and who to call.
Yeah, I want to echo what Lila just said. I think ACF has a lot of resources that are so helpful to students here. And it translates in the way of showing guidance and support for students who are witnessing these actions and for the legislations passing right now and don't know exactly what to do. When the legislation on my campus came and people advocated against the IRA definition, we immediately reached out to alumni, ICC, a lot of other mobilization groups to kind of get the Jewish community together and bring this forward. And I think having that point of contact and network to talk to and bounce off ideas and kind of get their perspective on things really helped us confront the decision and stop it before it past. I also want to add that ACF could be very useful in contacting administration. I know that sometimes at my university, when students reach out to administration, it's not very effective. They don't really do a lot of things. But whenever there's a big alumni network that also advocates for student needs and say, oh, wait, this is actually important, then it does raise these like almost alarm bells in administration. And they say, oh, like people actually care about this. Maybe we should pay attention. Maybe we should do something instead of just like write it off somewhere and like never touch it again. So, really important work.
I think it's also been really great to have the support of ACF and similar organizations. I know that Alums for Campus Fairness published a statement about the reinstatement of Duke's SSI chapter after students supporting Israel was held to a double standard and their recognition was vetoed. And it was very helpful having the support of not only ACF, but numerous other organizations and media outlets that picked up the story and raised awareness about what was going on, and perhaps then raised alarm bells, including to student government senators who I know now regret their decision of voting to support the veto and to deny recognition to students supporting Israel on the basis of their social media conduct. So I think it's been really helpful having statements like that and other resources, in addition to a statement that ACF posted on the passage and supporting the passage of the IRA definition at Duke. And it's helpful to have that network of support and solidarity when sometimes it can be difficult to navigate these situations as a student. And it's also been very helpful for me to have the support of the Israel on Campus Coalition and to be connected with students at other universities and alumni and staff who are dedicated to this work and to empowering students to advocate in a way that is safe and is powerful on campuses.
On a similar note, in July, ACF sent out a call to action with a petition calling for the Department of Asian American Studies at UCLA to retract their anti-Semitic statement. This is a really serious and ongoing issue at UCLA, and I'm tremendously grateful that ACF brought more light to it. Alumni can continue to support students by supporting ACF and Stand With Us and other similar organizations, and asking students on the ground how they can help.
Thank you again so much to all of our panelists. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your Sunday to be here and to share with our alumni and our community what's going on campus and what you've experienced as Jewish students and in kind of that Jewish advocate role on campus. We really appreciate your time. We don't have any questions in the Q&A, so we are going to go ahead and wrap up, but I did want to say thank you, and thank you to everyone that took the time to watch. It's really important as alumni that we are listening to the students and supporting the students where they're at and with what they need. So thank you for being a part of this panel.